Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the International Sleep Charity. I'm Charlie Alton, and I'm introducing as part of my role as co-founder of the charity. This is our book club podcast series. Last month, we had Professor Russell Foster from the UK, who gave a great and very technical talk from his book. And he had a super engaged question and answer session afterwards, so the people really enjoyed it. This month, we've got something very different. We're very lucky to have Emily Anthes joining us from Brooklyn in New York. Emily's a science writer. This is her second book. And what I really love about Emily's work, it's really practical stuff that all of us can do. And this is really what we're about at the International Sleep Charity. We're all about helping people sleep better. So we're really lucky to have Emily with us today. Because it's a presentation, first of all, by Emily, there's a question and answer session afterwards. So please don't interrupt. Just save your questions until the end. So without any more ado, I'm going to hand over to the main event and say, Emily, a very warm welcome, and over to you.
Thanks for that great introduction. I'm really happy to be here. And I am going to share my screen now. I have about 15, 20 minutes of a presentation, and then I'm happy to take questions about anything I've said or haven't said, anything you're curious about the indoor environment. So give me 1 minute here. All right, is that working? Can you all see that?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So as you all just heard, my name is Emily Anthes, and I'm a science journalist and the author of The Great Indoors, The Surprising Science of How Buildings Shape Our Behavior, Health, and Happiness. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can use evidence-based design to create indoor spaces that improve our health and well-being. Part of that is sleep. I know this is a sleep charity, but I'm going to talk about lots of other elements of our health and well-being as well. So modern humans are an indoor species. We spend about 90% of our time indoors. In recent years, scientists have begun probing our indoor environments in stunning new detail. And what they're finding is that indoor spaces affect us in profound and sometimes surprising ways. And we can harness these findings to engage in what's known as evidence-based design. In evidence-based design, architects, designers, and planners draw upon rigorous studies and the scientific literature to create spaces that they hope will lead to certain outcomes, whether that's a quicker recovery from surgery in a hospital, higher productivity in a workplace, or better sleep when you're at home. There's a huge body of research here, and I don't have time to go through it all today, but I am going to walk through a few examples of design features and elements that we now know can make a huge difference. Since this is a sleep group, I thought we should start with something that we know is really crucial for good sleep health. And that is to make sure we're exposed to ample amounts of daylight and natural light during the daytime hours. The reason that daylight is so important is because it keeps our circadian rhythms or internal clocks set to the right time, so synchronized with the solar day and what the sun is doing. And we know that daylight exposure is particularly important in the morning. And it's exposure to the short wavelength light, that is the light that's on the cooler, bluer end of the spectrum, that essentially tells our bodies that morning has arrived and helps suppress our body's levels of melatonin. So therefore, exposure to this morning light means that it helps our circadian rhythms sync up with what the sun is doing, which in turn then helps us both remain alert during the day and fall asleep better and stay asleep better at night. There's also a well-documented connection between sunlight and mood. Exposure to more light and brighter light seems to boost our mood. The exact mechanism here is a bit unclear, But there is research that suggests that light exposure can boost our body's production of serotonin, which is a hormone that helps regulate our mood. So that's one leading possibility for the underlying mechanism. What's more, daylight improves job satisfaction and workplace cognitive performance. And it has benefits for students too. Students in sunny classrooms, for instance, have higher test scores than those in dark ones. There's also a lot of evidence that hospital patients in sunny rooms tend to fare better than those in shady ones. To give just a few examples, they use fewer painkillers, report less stress, are discharged sooner, and even in some studies have lower mortality rates. So, how can you harness the power of daylight in your home or office, especially right now while a lot of us are spending a lot of time in our homes? It's probably not feasible to, tear down walls and replace them with floor to ceiling windows. But there are some other steps you can take. As I mentioned, it's particularly important to get light exposure in the morning. So one strategy is that if there's a place in your home that gets a lot of natural light, a lot of sunlight in the morning, it might make sense to start your workday there. So you're really maximizing this morning light exposure. Another thing that might be worth exploring is what's known as circadian lighting. So, this is a relatively new technology, and the idea is to create artificial lighting schemes that better mirror natural light and the way that natural light changes over the course of the day. So, these are bulbs that emit a bright, cool, bluish light during peak daytime hours, similar to bright sunlight. But then they transition into emitting a warmer, more amber colored light as evening approaches. Finally, if your home is really dark, especially as we're going into these winter months, you might want to consider getting a light therapy lamp, which can provide you with a burst of this light exposure. This is a medical intervention, however, so I can't formally recommend it, but it is something that might be worth exploring with your doctor if you feel like your home or your spaces are just not getting enough light during the day. Another way to create healthy and restorative indoor environments is to find ways to incorporate nature. There's a really robust scientific literature on this, and it is very convincing. There are now numerous studies that show that exposure to nature can have all sorts of physiological benefits, including reducing pain, reducing stress, reducing blood pressure, and even boosting the immune system and the function of our immune cells. What makes nature so potent? One common explanation is what's known as the biophilia hypothesis. The general idea is that because of how we evolved out in the rough and tumble of nature, we have an innate affinity for the natural world. So nature tends to catch our eye and to engage us, serving as essentially a positive distraction from our stress, our pain, and our anxiety. And it turns out that nature isn't just good for our bodies, it also has a variety of cognitive benefits, including improving attention, memory, learning, and productivity. For instance, scientists have found that test scores are higher at schools that are surrounded by greenery than at schools that are surrounded by man made landscapes. And bringing plants, small house plants, indoor plants, into offices can improve productivity and concentration. Scientists explain these benefits with what's known as attention restoration theory. The theory holds that the tasks of everyday life are cognitively taxing. Looking at nature, on the other hand, engages us, but it's an effortless kind of engagement. It catches our eye, but it doesn't require a lot of cognitive work. And so the idea is that this gives our brains a break and restores and refreshes our attention. So when we return to those difficult tasks of everyday living, we have more mental resources to allocate. And the good news about these findings is that when it comes to incorporating nature into our indoor spaces, it seems that basically any kind of nature can do the trick. So a lot of the early studies focused on views of nature. Landscapes you're seeing through your window. And we know that those can have huge benefits. But if that's not something you have access to, studies suggest that adding some indoor plants, images of nature, so maybe photographs or murals of natural landscapes, or even playing nature sounds like bird song or babbling brooks, can have some of the same stress relieving benefits. A third really important component of our indoor environments is air quality. And that's something that a lot of us have been thinking a lot more about lately because of the pandemic. And indeed, we know that all sorts of dangerous things can linger in indoor air. One, of course, is pathogens like the coronavirus, which I know is very much on all of our minds. But the other is pollutants. All sorts of consumer products, including our furniture, our flooring, our electronics, and our personal care and hygiene products, give off chemicals that can pollute the air. And some of our own behaviors and activities, especially cooking and cleaning, which I suspect are also things we've been doing a lot more of in recent days, can also generate indoor air pollutants. And these pollutants have well documented health effects, causing a variety of lung, heart, and vascular problems. Air pollution and indoor air pollution can have cognitive effects too. One really clear example of this is, of course, every time we exhale, we are breathing out carbon dioxide. And it turns out that when there are a lot of people in a room or a room is poorly ventilated, so imagine, a crowded lecture hall or maybe a conference room, carbon dioxide levels can actually get high enough to impair our thinking. And recent research shows that boosting ventilation rates can both reduce the concentration of CO2 indoors and also improve occupants' performance on a variety of cognitive tasks. So, how can you improve your indoor air quality? The key here is really to improve ventilation. So, increasing airflow can curb the spread of infectious disease and reduce our exposure to potentially toxic substances. And you can use a variety of different strategies to try and improve your ventilation. The basic underlying strategy is to increase the rate of ventilation. So that's how frequently the air in a room is replaced. The specific rate depends on a lot of different factors like room size and occupancy. But for shared spaces with a lot of people, experts generally recommend 5 to 6 what they call air changes per hour, which means that the air inside a room is being entirely replaced 5 or 6 times an hour. If you have some kind of central HVAC system, it's generally possible to change the settings. So you're increasing what's known as the outdoor air fraction. And what that means is that you're bringing in more fresh air from outside rather than just sort of continuously recirculating the air that's indoors. A low-tech way of doing the same thing is to just open your windows. I'm here in an old apartment building in New York City. We absolutely do not have any sort of central HVAC system, but we have a lot of windows that we can and do open. Also, if you have exhaust fans in your bathroom or your kitchen, make sure to actually use them, especially when you're cooking and cleaning, which is when it's most important. If you don't have those kinds of exhaust fans, you can get window fans and set them to exhaust so they are pulling any potentially contaminated air sort of constantly out of your home. Depending on what kind of ventilation system you might have and your access to it, you might also be able to install higher quality air filters, which can help you trap particles and droplets of fluid that could be carrying viruses or other pathogens. Unfortunately, a lot of home ventilation systems aren't made for some of these super heavy duty filters, which are generally used more in hospitals and commercial buildings. But if that's not an option, you can consider getting a standalone portable air cleaner, which is essentially just a standalone isolated device that has one of these high quality filters installed in it. So far, I've mostly been talking about some of the direct effects of the indoor environment, but indoor spaces can also affect our health and well-being more indirectly by shaping our behavior. For example, there's an emerging discipline that's known as active design. And active design revolves around the idea that we can design environments that nudge people into being more physically active just by going about their everyday lives. And the reason this is important is because research shows that incorporating even a little bit more movement into our daily routines can have real health benefits. In large longitudinal studies, for instance, researchers have observed that men who climb just 3 flights of stairs a day face lower odds of an early death. But in a lot of ways, movement has been designed out of our buildings. Consider what you see when you walk into most high rises. Elevators tend to get pride of place. They're prominently positioned in these bright, gleaming lobbies, practically demanding to be ridden. Stairwells, on the other hand, if you can find them at all, are often narrow, dark, and dingy, and hidden away behind these sort of heavy, imposing fire doors. Studies show that we can flip this script and that we can encourage people to forego the elevator and take the stairs instead by making stairs more visible, more convenient, wider, aesthetically appealing, and architecturally distinct. Displaying artwork or playing music in stairwells can also increase stair use, and so can what are known as stair prompts, or highly visible signs that just encourage people to take the stairs. We can also nudge people into making healthier food choices. As anyone who has ever kept candy on their desk has discovered, we're more likely to consume food when it is within easy reach. So making wholesome food more prominent, more accessible, and more convenient, or conversely, making junk food more difficult to acquire, can nudge our diets in a healthier direction. One of my favorite demonstrations of this idea comes from an elementary school in California, where researchers did a simple milk swap. Typically, both white and chocolate milk were readily available in the school cafeteria. They were stacked in neighboring crates in front of the lunch counter. But for 1 week, the researchers hid the chocolate cartons behind the counter and posted a sign telling students that if they wanted chocolate milk, all they had to do was ask. And as a result of this one simple change, the share of students selecting white milk, which is, of course, healthier and lower in sugar, jumped from 30 to 48%. So those are a few examples of how powerful the built environment can be, but there are also a couple caveats that I want to mention. And the first one is that indoor environments are complex, and variables can interact in complicated and sometimes surprising ways. For instance, when an office is dark, noisy, or cold, workers tend to have more complaints about the air quality. Likewise, when the background noise in a room increases, people become less satisfied with the air temperature. The second caveat is that people are also complex, and research makes clear there's no one environment that's ideal for all people or all tasks. If you've worked in an office, you may be familiar with the infamous office thermostat wars. And you know that a workspace that feels balmy to one worker can feel positively Arctic to the coworker in the neighboring cubicle. And individuals vary tremendously, but in general, women tend to be more sensitive to temperature changes than men and to prefer warmer workspaces. And it's not just a matter of comfort. It turns out that women score better on cognitive tests at warmer air temperatures, while men do better at cooler ones, which means that an office that's calibrated to men's thermal preferences, as many offices are, might actually be making it harder for female employees to perform at their peak. Likewise, different environments are good for different kinds of tasks. So there are some intriguing studies, for instance, that suggest that while cooler blue or light might be good for alertness and multitasking, warmer, more amber colored light might be ideal for enhancing our creativity. So even though there are a lot of evidence-based principles we can use to design healthier, happier spaces, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all environment. And design definitely isn't a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of our problems. It's not going to end the pandemic, but it can nudge us in the right direction, help us help make us healthier, happier, and more productive. And it can be the infrastructure on which we build a better future. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions and have a discussion.
Thank you, Emily, for this really, really amazing talk. I mean, my personal research actually echoes many of the things that you talked about. So that's very cool. If any of the attendees want to ask any question, feel free to raise your hand on the in the. Feel free to click on raise my hand in the participants section if you want. You can also open your camera. We would really welcome that. So just to kick off the discussion, so for example, just talking about gender differences in temperature preferences. Do you have any suggestions for that? Because for example, like I really like a colder, warmer area, a colder area, whereas my partner really prefers a warmer place, and I always get sometimes very, very sleepy when it's warmer. So do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the challenge it poses, and especially of office design in general, where is a space that you have a lot of people who all have different preferences, different tasks they're working on. I mean, it's a hard challenge to create an environment that serves everyone. And really, the best approach, I think, is to sort of think about creating essentially micro environments. So if we're talking about an office here, maybe different zones of the office, certain places that get more light, certain places that are darker, certain places that are warmer, others that are cooler, and different types of furniture and arrangements, and allow people to sort of move throughout the space according to their preferences and needs. It's a bit harder in a home. But the other thing that we see, there are a couple of developments happening that I think aim to solve some of these problems. So like personalized heating and cooling systems, we're seeing like some interesting robots and other sort of personal heating elements that people can install at their own desk, or cooling elements. We're also seeing a rise, I talk in the book about an app called Goldilocks that sort of helps arm people with the information they need to make some of these choices. So like right now, we don't actually have a lot of data on our indoor environments. Like you can get access to all sorts of information about the weather outside, but not necessarily the climate inside your home or your workspace. And so there are apps and things coming down the pike that are like aimed to give people that info, so they could like open up the app of their office and see like, oh, it's cool and quiet in this area right now, I'm going to go work there. So I don't know that any of that is like the practical solution you're looking for. But I think there are some technologies being developed that might help solve those problems. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a question that just came in. Claire, I saw you. Perhaps I can just ask this question, and then I'll go back. I'll go to you. So Tobias asks if artificial blue light is as good as natural morning light, and if you have any insights about that.
That's not something I've looked into extensively. Some people here might know more about that than I do. The short answer is I don't know. I would imagine for some things it should be identical, but we know that sunlight has a variety of benefits that go beyond like circadian benefits. And I don't know if like all those same benefits are there for artificial blue light. That's an interesting question, and I don't know.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, Tobias, actually, some of my research goes into a bit of your question. So, if I may, I'll just say a few words. So, if in terms of getting you in terms of waking you up, or in terms of making you more alert, I'm quite confident that that there's a lot of evidence saying that artificial blue light is good enough, because the proteins in your brain cells that connects to your retina just needs a bit of blue light to kick them off. So in terms of waking you up, that's fairly similar. And conversely, if you get exposed to some blue light at night, for example, at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., that will also create a bit of the opposite negative consequence. However, what's a bit not similar, the difference is for more of your, for example, vitamins, you get your body needs a bit of sunlight to make vitamin D, and there's, at least to my knowledge, there's no convincing evidence that exposure to artificial light does the same job, at least not to my knowledge. So Tobias, if does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up?
Oh, thank you. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
No problem. So Claire, would you like to open your microphone and ask your question?
Thanks. Hi. Emily, I have a question about spaces that encourage activity, and you had a gym which was pink, or a sports area that was pink. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure that would make me. I mean, I wasn't sure that was an example of something that was encouraging. So I'd love to hear a bit more about spaces that encourage activity and whether or not pink is meant to motivate or not.
No, I mean, to be totally honest, I just I picked that photo because I liked the aesthetics of it. But there's not been much on color specifically on spaces to encourage activity, but there has been a lot of other work. So it's sort of been done at two scales. There's a whole thread of research that focuses on the urban and city scale, which is not my focus as much, but there are studies that things like making sure that neighborhoods have wide, well-maintained sidewalks, and that there are green spaces, and that it is safe to walk, and that there are bike lanes. All of those things encourage residents to be more active in terms of their everyday lives. And then when it comes to the building level, the main focus there has really been on stairs. There have been just dozens and dozens of studies on encouraging stair use. But there are other strategies as well. So I write a bit about playgrounds, and there is evidence that doing things like painting, this is a bit about color, painting multicolored markings like on playground surfaces like blacktops and asphalt can encourage kids to play more and also engage in more creative play. Everything from like hopscotch courts to dragons and castles, these things sort of seem to spark imaginative play and get kids involved in playing. And then I also write about a school that has done some really innovative things with active design. So like they've deliberately designed this sort of fairly sprawling campus that has a lot of walking built into it. Inside the school building itself, they have hidden animal tracks. This is a school in Virginia, of local animals that live around there in the floor throughout the school to sort of make walking fun and more like a game so kids can get rewarded if they walk. They've also sort of they've done a bit of the microenvironment work that seems to be good for productivity, and they've built like different types of spaces throughout the school. So like small group learning spaces and lounges and breakout spaces to sort of encourage kids and teachers to move around the school throughout the day. Those are some of the big things they've done in terms of encouraging movement. I don't know, is there like a specific, were you just looking for an overview, or is there a specific strategy you were curious?
No, it was actually the pink. I was wondering if there was a color.
Yeah, no, there is not, to my knowledge, other than some studies suggesting that sort of multicolored play areas can encourage kids to be more active and playful.
That's interesting. I know with if you're doing package design, for example, people pick up yellow and red packages much more quicker than they would pick up another package. For example, so I was just wondering.
Yeah, so I don't look at that. I've gotten a lot of questions about like wall color and paint color and stuff, you know, I think for obvious reasons, because that's like one of the few things that's sort of relatively easy to change about our own space. And there's a lot of interest in that, but part of the problem is that there are a lot of sort of small, not terribly well-run studies, and a lot of them contradict each other. So it's sort of hard to say, you know, X wall color is ideal for Y. Sure.
Emily, sorry, I have another question about talking about buildings, because at the workplace, in at least my lab in Cambridge, we always have the temperature at 21 degrees Celsius, of course. So, and then that's all day long. And for example, during the morning, I don't really mind. During lunchtime, I don't really mind. But sometimes, you know, in the afternoon, especially, I get really cold. So I don't know if you have any insights on. You talked about circadian in terms of the light, right? But do you have any knowledge about or hypotheses about temperature in the circadian aspect?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the afternoon, but there is a lot of research on temperature, like in the bedroom at night when we're sleeping, and that lower temperatures seem to be conducive to sleep, and that you may want to keep your bedroom a few degrees cooler at night. Partly for energy savings, but that can be really good for sleep. Our body temperature absolutely fluctuates over the course of the 24-hour day. That is on a circadian rhythm. And so that might be playing into why you're feeling colder in the afternoons. But we do know that at night when we're sleeping, our bodies like it a bit colder.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks a lot. So I'm quite happy that you mentioned that the temperature needs to be a bit cooler when we sleep to fall asleep, because I really believe in that. But I know that a lot of people like to open the heating system before they sleep.
Huh.
So I think that's some really good advice that you're providing. Is there any other questions that I haven't? Oh, I think there are a couple of raised hands. Sorry. Liz, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to ask about light in the workplace, how much difference it makes if you're reliant on natural light coming through a window. If you're facing away from the window, does it make a significant difference whether you're facing that light or it's flooding the room that you're in?
You know, I don't know of a study that's looked at that specifically. I don't think... I don't think it should make a huge difference as long as you're still sort of close enough to be getting lots of daylight in your space and you're seeing it sort of peripherally. I mean, I don't think you need to be staring directly at a window. At the same time, I would guess that like you're not getting the maximum benefits if literally your back is to the natural light like the whole day and you're sort of never getting that front on. But I think there's a wide range of how it can benefit you. I mean, there are downsides to a lot of daylight too, especially if you think about offices. Sometimes you get people complaining about glare. So, one lesson for design is that there are always trade-offs. And so offices need to sort of be thoughtfully designed. But I don't think you necessarily need to face the window head on all day long, though I don't know of studies that have explicitly looked at that.
Emily, can I add to your answer?
Yeah.
Hi, Charlie Alton here. I used a little app last year called Lys, Lys, and it's really cute. You wear a little light-sensitive button on your collar, and it tells you how much light you're getting throughout the day. And that's really nice because you can test for yourself about how much light you're getting, whether it will automatically give you an answer, whether how much effect it's having not for you about facing the window or facing away from the window. So if you're really interested, you can try down that road.
Yeah, I suspect that you even, the reason I think it probably doesn't matter much is because I think even if you're not facing a window head on, you're probably getting a lot more light exposure than you think you are. I mean, our eyes are pretty good at picking up ambient light.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I do have another question as well. So just, you were talking about air conditioning and how much new air has been brought in. Quite often, I hear a lot in the workplace people complaining about air conditioning actually spreading germs. Is there any insight you can give us on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible, in both sort of two kinds of ways. One is, probably what we're thinking about now, where like if you have any sort of aerosolized pathogens, coronavirus, or, more typically just like flu or whatever germs are going around, they can absolutely travel through HVAC systems. I mean, that's one reason that the best commercial buildings will have high quality filters. The best of those filters can trap, 99+% of those particles. But the other thing is that air conditioning units in particular can also be home to pathogens that live there specifically. So the one that's sort of most common is Legionella, a bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease and some other respiratory problems. It really loves sort of wet, damp, man-made infrastructure and has often been documented in hot water heaters, air conditioning units, things like that. And so you have this bacteria that's growing in the air conditioning unit, and then it is sort of like spewing it out to buildings. That, as you can imagine, is not ideal. And that's actually, that's been a problem in some buildings as people have started to return to the workplace because sort of the plumbing systems and the water systems and the AC units were idle for so long that in some places, like the growth of Legionella really exploded while these buildings were empty. So that's something that people should sort of be aware of right now, and that's sort of on some epidemiologist radar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, just to echo what Emily just mentioned. I mean, there was a study a few months ago that showed that coronavirus was actually spread because of this air circulating system. So I think at least currently or in the future, there will be much more awareness on kind of like this adding filters or having a good air conditioning circulating system. Definitely, really, really nice comment, really nice question. So in the interest of time, Rebecca, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, hi. Thanks for the great talk. I just wanted to ask a question. So, as a student, you often don't have much influence on your room design because you're usually renting, and you often spend all of your time in one room that you use for both sleep and work. So, do you have any suggestion how to optimize the space and maybe like compartmentalize it better so that it fits both like sleeping and like work processes? And if you have any like low budget suggestions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I also am a renter, so I have more than one room, but like I'm definitely sympathetic to that. And I think there are definitely limitations, but there are a lot of sort of fairly easy, fairly inexpensive things you can do. My number one recommendation for everyone anywhere, no matter where you live, is plants. If you are willing to take that on, and there are some pretty low maintenance plants, but that's one thing I've really changed about my space since starting to do this work. I mean, we just know the benefits are nearly limitless. So bringing in a few plants, or if you really don't want live plants, as I mentioned, like putting up some nature imagery is likely to have a lot of benefits. Another small thing you can do is to explore different types of bulbs, whether that, so light bulbs, whether that is a full-fledged circadian bulb, or again, like thinking about this idea of micro environments. Maybe you have a desk and you want a desk lamp with like really bright, cool, focused task lighting, but then you have another lamp by your bed that's sort of much more amber, much more conducive to sleep and relaxation. Or to get some of these, they're now like, they're not super expensive, these like programmable LEDs that you can get a bulb that changes its color and intensity over the course of a day. So those are two sort of quick upgrades that are fairly simple to make. In terms of air quality, I'm a big, no pun intended, a big fan of window fans, which are also fairly affordable. I guess those are the first things that come to mind. And I guess the other thing is to sort of, one of the lessons of active design is like, even if it's not focused on, even if it's not physical activity you want to optimize for, like we are really creatures of habit and convenience. So if there's so being strategic about the way you organize your space, in terms of like the pandemic, we've thought about this. So we have created like basically this disinfection station, like on a table right by the door to our apartment, that has like hand sanitizer, masks, disinfecting wipes, that makes it like really, really easy every time we go in and out to do those things. And so thinking about like, if there are any habits you want to encourage, like how can you set up your space to make that as easy and convenient for yourself as possible? Because we know that like hugely increases the odds that we engage in those behaviors.
Yeah, thanks all for this, for the question, Rebecca, and Emily, for your answer. It's really like your book and the talk really raises our attention to like something that I personally haven't really thought about before, like perhaps having different lamps at my work table and at my bedside table would make a very nice difference. Yeah, so thanks. Tobias, do you have another question? Your hand is raised.
Thanks. My question was more a follow-up on the temperature discussion we had earlier. I think that shows the complexity of every parameter you are talking about. It can be light or air quality, but just think of temperature in the night. You have like 3 different temperatures. So one is the room temperature, which determines the temperature you're inhaling. Yeah, so that's your breathing temperature, and indeed that should be cooler. And there's a lot of literature showing that calms you down, which is something we want to have over the night. But then there's a second temperature, that's your core body temperature. And the core body temperature, that's the one which is really following the circadian rhythm, and that is lower in the night, of course. And so your bed temperature, which means the temperature below the comforter, shouldn't be really low. Because your core body temperature is already lower, and there is literature even showing that a higher bedding temperature is sometimes improving sleep onset. And then there's a third temperature, and that is your feet or your hands. Well, the feet can be a problem, not your hands, and that is based on your circulation. Yeah, and that is why perhaps people can sleep too hot and still have cold feet. And so I think there's so much on it, which shows how detailed you have to look into all these parameters. And so I really thank for the talk today. It was really, really interesting. Thank you, Emily.
Oh, you're welcome. And yeah, I mean, that's like all of these things we have a lot more evidence about, how to create healthy indoor spaces than we used to. And there are actionable things we can do now. But there's still so much left to learn and like so many questions, and there's a lot we don't know still. So yeah, that's a useful reminder how complex these things can be.
Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting. I remember some lectures about researchers looking at temperature decreases. The core body temperature decreasing during sleep onset, and other types of really interesting, really meaningful studies. Thanks a lot, Tobias, for sharing. Is there any other questions? I think we are running a bit over, so if there's no other questions, I would just like to thank really everybody for coming, and especially Emily for the great talk. I just wanted to mention that next year, on the 20th of January, we have our next speaker confirmed, who will be speaking more about the myth of sleep, and the importance as well of good sleep. So you can find more detail about our next talks on our website. So right now, I would like to thank everybody again, and have a nice day, and Happy New Year as well.
Thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks, Izzy. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.